Welcome, Knight-Bagehot board members, sponsors, guests, alumni, fellows, and friends. I'm Ann Grimes, Director of the Knight-Bagehot Fellowship in Economics and Business Journalism. We're delighted you could join us this evening to celebrate the 45th anniversary of our fellowship program. I want to thank Columbia Journalism School Dean Steve Call and Business School Dean Kostas Maglaris for supporting our program, which really is unique among journalism fellowships in the US. As a former business reporter who covered technology on the West Coast for the Wall Street Journal, I know how important it is to have a trained cadre of journalists who understand accounting, corporate finance, tech, taxes, and business. To that end, each year we select a cohort of experienced journalists who come to Columbia to study at the journalism and business schools. Our fellows enroll in classes for academic credit. Yes, they have to worry about their grades. So this is not a totally relaxed mid-career break. Rather, it is an opportunity for them to deepen their knowledge and sharpen their journalism skills in order to advance coverage of our increasingly complex global world. Some of our fellows continue on for a second year and complete a Columbia MBA. All will join an alumni club of over 400 distinguished journalists from national and international media organizations, large and small, domestic and international, spanning digital print, multimedia, radio, and broadcast outlets. We hold this fundraiser to assist our fellows with tuition expenses and support. That is why we are here tonight. I hope you will enjoy our program. Our theme tonight is the Big Reset. We'll explore that theme with a distinguished panel of journalists, a keynote conversation with Accenture CEO Julie Sweet. In honor of our 45th anniversary, we've published a collection of select writings from 2020 by 45 of our Knight-Bagehot alums, looking at the pandemic, the protests, and the presidency. Echoing that, we've organized a silent auction. You'll be able to bid on 25 iconic photos from this year donated by Reuters. Finally, for those who would like to network, we'll host a 30-minute after party where you can bid on the photos and chat with alumni, colleagues, and friends. Thank you for coming. Thank you for your support. Now I'd like to introduce Julian Tett, who chairs our amazing Knight-Bagehot Board of Advisors. Jillian is an award-winning journalist, chair of the US editorial board and American editor-at-large at the Financial Times. She is a Cambridge University PhD, the author of several books, and co-founder of the FT's news site, Moral Money. Welcome, Jillian.
Hello and welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever in the world you're watching us. We are delighted that you have joined us on today's 45th anniversary celebration for the Knight-Bagehot program. Now, as anyone who has ever turned 45, like me, knows, 45 is a big birthday. It's a time when you're often halfway through your life, when you'll think you're a grown-up, where you have to re-evaluate the world. And the focus for this year's celebration is the Big Reset, because that's frankly what many of us are grappling with in our everyday lives, whether it's in terms of trying to learn to use our technology, whether it's in terms of trying to do our jobs on digital platforms, work out where the world's going, or write about it as journalists. Because we're living in a period of time when we are being convulsed by extraordinary changes. We decided to call tonight's celebration essentially a celebration based around the 3 Ps. That's a pandemic, protests, and presidency or politics, or both, because of course the politics and presidency are mixed up right now. But behind those 3 Ps, what the Knight-Bagehot program is particularly dedicated towards developing is a coverage of economics and finance. Because we know that money makes the world go round. It's not just money that makes the world go round, but if you don't know how money goes around the world, if you don't know how business and economics and finance really works, you can't really understand politics or pandemics or protests or any other aspect of what influences us all and affects us as citizens. And never before has it been more important to have that understanding. And that understanding is only possible if you have a group of journalists who are trained to understand economics and finance and corporate balance sheets and markets. That doesn't come easily or naturally because the world today is incredibly complex. But we need it today very, very badly. And so, on behalf of everyone at the Knight-Bagehot program, I'd like to say a very big thank you to our amazing sponsors who have stepped up and supported us. And let me stress, this really is a cause that is in the wider public interest and social good. So thank you all very much indeed for helping to make business and financial and economic journalism better. For anyone who'd like to join them, there's a button on the screen which will enable you to donate as well. I'm sure you can find it, so please do. And that's the end of my hard sell. But if you have donated, thank you, thank you, thank you. Not just on behalf of the journalists, but everybody who's benefiting from this social good. And now, just to explain a bit more about what the Knight-Bagehot program does, why it matters, and why it's so important in these incredibly troubled times as we confront the Great Reset. We're going to have a video with a collection of alumni who've benefited from the program.
The Knight-Bagehot Fellowship was created to provide learning and expertise in business. And that was no small thing at the time. It was created in 1975, which was around the time I was coming out of school and beginning my career. I can tell you that business journalism was very undeveloped.
One of the better things about it was that we got to take whatever courses we wanted to at Columbia. And so I took a course in accounting, which was completely off the wall for anything I ever had done in my life. But the professor was fantastic and actually got me interested in accounting. And that kind of sort of changed my whole vision of stuff that I wanted to write about for the future.
My first job after the Knight-Bagehot Fellowship was as the economics editor at the Washington Post, where I had to oversee our coverage of international trade and the Federal Reserve and the macroeconomy. Without the Bagehot experience, without having taken courses in financial markets and accounting, I don't think I would have felt that ease and confidence that you need when you're walking into a role like that.
To be inside the business school was both a really interesting experience academically and also as a journalist to really understand how the people who, run big companies are trained to do that.
I think the Knight-Bagehot Fellowship has become even more important in the last 2 decades as journalism budgets have declined, as the opportunities for journalists to get education and the funds for journalists to do training has declined, and as the pressures on journalists to produce more and more has increased. It's made it harder to develop the deep domain knowledge that you really need to be a great journalist. The Knight-Bagehot program has helped address that.
In a world that's kind of running away from the building blocks of a global economy or globalization or very insular and nationalistic, you need journalists with an appreciation of the world to be able to explain where we're coming from and where we're heading. So I really need for the Knight-Bagehot Fellowship to exist, to continue to exist, to thrive, and to give more reporters a chance to go through it and come out on the other side better equipped to inform audiences around the world.
I think, as many of you know, the Knight-Bagehot program is really a flagship of our school. And this year in particular, it's easy to see why this program has been so attractive to its applicants, to its fellows, its alumni. We live in this time of extraordinary volatility and complexity. And, the Knight-Bagehot program was set up with a vision of expertise, of knowledge-based journalism, of specialization, with the conviction that as the world gets more complicated, as the world gets more interconnected, journalism is going to have to become smarter. And and more aligned with the kinds of training and expertise that shapes our global economy. And so I'm just so proud of what the alumni here have achieved. I'm excited about the role that the program continues to play and the quality of folks it continues to attract. And above all, I'm grateful to you for the support you provide, because without your support, without your charity and contributions and your vision, the program couldn't move forward. So thank you again on behalf of everyone at Columbia.
My name is Jennifer Preston. I'm the Vice President for Journalism at the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation and early supporter of the Knight-Bagehot program. Today, the Knight Foundation promotes the First Amendment and solutions that rebuild trust in journalism and specifically addresses the crisis in local journalism to help ensure a healthy democracy. It is a great honor to be with you tonight to present two important awards to outstanding journalists. It is also an honor to be here with Anne Grimes, the new executive director of the Knight-Bagehot program. We know that she will leverage her experience in Silicon Valley to keep the fellows and fellowship program moving fast into the future. First, the Wirtz Prize. This prize honors a woman journalist for excellence in business journalism that fosters a global understanding of global business. It was established in 2018 by the Women's Economic Roundtable. Spearheading funding for the prize was Dr. Amelia Augustus, a co-founder of the Women's Roundtable and the Muriel Siebert Foundation. Ms. Siebert, as you all know, was the first woman on the New York Stock Exchange. Tonight, the Wirtz Prize winner is Erica Fry, a senior writer at Fortune magazine, for her article, Epidemic of Fear, which charted what happened in the Philippines when a French pharmaceutical giant believed its vaccine would defeat an insidious disease. As one of the judges commented, it shook a country's faith in this vaccine and seemingly others. Quote, I was riveted by every paragraph until the end. Congratulations, Erica Fry.
Thank you, Jennifer, for the kind introduction, and thank you to the Knight-Bagehot program and the Women's Economic Roundtable for this award. I'm truly honored. I first got interested in this story about 3 years ago when I read a news report about a new vaccine developed by one of the world's largest pharmaceutical companies that was being blamed for the deaths of Filipino school children. The story quickly fell out of the international press, but I became obsessed with it and understanding what had happened. As I learned in my reporting, the story was far more complicated and far more tragic than that news report suggested. The story of the rushed rollout of a much needed, much anticipated, but still not fully understood dengue vaccine in the Philippines also offers striking parallels and important lessons for the situation we find ourselves in today. About the very real dangers of politicizing science and of the immense importance of communicating science and all its ambiguity clearly, transparently, and with humility. I hope you'll read the whole story.
Next, I'm delighted to present the Wells Prize, which was created to honor the memory of Christopher Wells, a former director of the fellowship program and highly respected business journalist. The Wells Prize is awarded annually for an outstanding business story or series by a Knight-Bagehot alum. It is such an honor to present the Wells Prize tonight to Mary Williams Walsh, a member of the class of 1983. Mary is a financial reporter at the New York Times. She covers the intersection of finance, public policy, and the aging population. This includes pensions, public debt, insurance, and bankruptcy. This award is in recognition of not only Mary's outstanding work in the last year, but in recognition of her impressive business reporting career. Here's what the judges had to say about Mary's work. Mary Williams Walsh knocked it out of the ballpark in terms of breadth, depth, and sophistication of her reporting. Her expertise in the complicated world of bankruptcy and debt served her well as she explored the financial ramifications of the virus for corporations, impoverished countries, state governments, and public pension funds. Congratulations, Mary Williams Walsh.
Thank you so much for honoring me with this year's Chris Wells Memorial Prize. I've always felt that Chris took a bit of a gamble on me because I was the youngest one in my Bagehot Fellowship class that year, and I really didn't know the first thing about economics. What I did know was there was stuff going on that I couldn't understand at all. We had back-to-back corporate raids back then. We had double-digit mortgage rates. We had Paul Volcker at the Fed causing a lot of pain. And I wanted to be able to explain that in my reporting and felt that I couldn't. That was the thing that the Knight-Bagehot Fellowship program gives to its fellows, the ability to really get to the bottom of things and the tools to be able to explain them to other people who don't know about economics. After all these years, those tools still work for me. I'd also like to thank my editors at the New York Times because after all this time, they're still committed to running the kind of newsroom where we can do that kind of explanatory journalism. And it's a real gift. Thank you.
Welcome back. Well, when we all lie in bed at night, remembering all the images we've seen that day from our Zoom calls, it's worth stopping to ask, what are the visuals that will define this crazy, extraordinary time? What captures the 3 Ps of pandemic, protest, and the presidency? Well, you don't just need to imagine. We're going to now have a silent auction of 25 amazing, iconic visual images of the year from Reuters. So here to talk about these photographs is Reg Chua of Reuters. And I should stress that you can go online and bid for them in the silent auction. And if you miss it right now or decide to get inspired later, the auction will stay open until October the 26th. So please go ahead and bid. Think about what pictures and images you want to remember and want to celebrate. And in the meantime, over to you, Reg Chua, with the video.
We have great photographers at Reuters. We've won Pulitzers in photography every year for the last few years. But this is really a team sport. It's the totality of the images that really bring home the theme of this collection together, even if individual photographs are incredibly powerful by themselves. The Knight-Bagehot program is an amazing gift to business journalism. Yeah, so I guess this is our gift back. The list of alumni from the program is astounding, and many of them at the top of their profession. At Reuters, we've been fortunate enough to have a number of our staff attend the program, coming out better trained, better prepared, and just better journalists. For better or for worse, 2020 will go down in history books as iconic and powerful events as the coming down of the Berlin Wall or 9/11. And so while we all remember those times, we remember, and now we will remember how our lives are being upturned, how they're being changed. Having these images will sear those memories into our mind and really remind us of one of the most consequential times we will ever live through.
What incredible photos. Now let's turn to our panel discussion with a group of esteemed journalists who will explore tonight's theme, the Big Reset. It's my pleasure to introduce to you our panel. Dean Baquet, Executive Editor of the New York Times. Zanny Minton-Beatos, Editor-in-Chief at The Economist. Matt Murray, editor-in-chief at the Wall Street Journal, and our moderator, Mitra Kalita, currently Senior Vice President for News, Opinion, and Programming at CNN Digital. Welcome, everybody. Mitra, turning it over to you.
So to start this panel, I'm wondering if I could rewind us back to where we were in March. We all went through a lot back then as we were trying to pivot our news organizations. And I'm just wondering how each of you, seeing the news of the pandemic and the lockdown, responded. If you could take me back to where each of your news organizations were in the pivot when the pandemic hit. And there's highs and lows in this. So Matt Murray, because I used to work for you at the Wall Street Journal, I'm going to start with you. Take us back to March.
Sure, and thanks, Mitra. Thanks to everybody for having us on this panel. It's a pleasure to see everybody. I wish we were together in person. And of course, I'm honored to be part of the panel. And I'd say the first couple months out of the gate went very well. There was a lot of energy and a lot of creativity and big ideas that came out that I think really elevated the coverage. You saw readers responding, traffic spiked, readers were very engaged in the story. There was a lot of adrenaline flowing. And across our organization, there was a lot of almost instantaneous innovation. You know, we took stories free very quickly. We created a whole free bar. We started putting up information about the virus that was useful for people in ways that I'm not sure we would have actually done in normal times. As time went on, you know, the strain of working at home, the strain of living a story that you're also covering, missing the sort of frisson of being in a newsroom, of running into each other and sharing ideas, and the excitement and the adrenaline of that definitely took more of a toll.
Zanny, can we turn to you on what was your greatest challenge in that moment? You have to lock down. What do you do with your newsroom? And what surprised you about the way The Economist responded?
Well, thanks, Mitra. Hi, everybody. I'm also delighted to be here. Hi to you from London. I was listening to Matt just now, and I would pretty much second everything that he said. I mean, I think back, and for me, I date this actually to January 16th, which was the first time we mentioned the virus in The Economist, this mystery virus that had killed one person in Wuhan. And then a couple of weeks later, we first put it on the cover. And I remember very vividly in early February having a conversation with our bureau chief in Beijing, who had just been to Wuhan and was telling me that he was now required to lock down for 2 weeks and couldn't leave his apartment. And that was the beginning of us planning how to, move our entire processes online. And like Matt, I think there have been two big pivots. One is a process pivot. How do you move everything that was done in a newsrooms around the world online? How do you produce podcasts remotely? I've got colleagues producing them in their closets with their kids outside, all of that stuff. And broadly, I was really struck. I mean, the first week that we produced The Economist completely remotely, I was so nervous. When I actually saw a physical copy, when I saw it go up online, my heart was just, thank goodness this has worked. But that all went remarkably well. The other big pivot we had was the pivot of how do we kind of help our readers make sense of this extraordinary story, the biggest story, by a long shot in any of our lifetimes. And it's one that, I think everybody here has done an amazing job, everybody's publications, but it kind of has played in many ways to the strengths of The Economist, right? We're a global newspaper. We have a very strong science bench, a very strong data bench. We combine business, economics, politics. And I really saw that in the kind of my colleagues coming together. And like Matt, I was amazed at the kind of gusto with which, notwithstanding the difficulties of kind of producing things, all my colleagues rose to the occasion. And we had a core COVID group, as it was called, which was a group of experts and on the staff. We've definitely lost something not having people together, but we're not going to go back to the way we produced things before. This is a new world now.
Dean, take us back to March in the New York Times newsroom.
Well, all of this sounds remarkably familiar. I think every newsroom went through a version of this. I was stunned that we could put out a New York Times under these circumstances. We had planned, we had all the contingencies. We were on paper ready for it, but I was still stunned. Matt said something that particularly resonates. We were living the story. So it wasn't just a case of everybody starting to work from home. It was a case of people who had parents who were sick. It was a case of people whose schools had suddenly shut down. Suddenly, my instinct as an editor, and I'm sure this is true of every editor on this call, is if a story breaks, you put 10 reporters on an airplane and you go. Suddenly, you had to ask yourself the question, well, can I really send 10 reporters to a place where COVID is at its peak? Maybe all 10 don't want to go. How do I manage the 2 who might not want to go? Suddenly, domestic journalism, domestic news gathering is taking on some of the cast of international reporting. Suddenly, we have to develop a whole protocol. And I'm not just speaking for the New York Times. I'm speaking for all journalism. It is stunning to me how much good journalism has been produced in this era. It really is.
I just wonder what has changed in the newsroom from a hiring perspective, and if you have any thoughts on changing that culture as it relates to race and systemic racism when we are in a virtual, you're not having those water cooler conversations, for example, which can make talking about race much harder as well.
Well, I'd say a couple of things at the Journal in general. We had been, I think, for a couple of years prior to this summer, I've been in this job almost 2.5 years. We had been consciously changing hiring practices, recruiting practices, and thinking much more about who we hire and about diversity more thoughtfully and deliberately. We had already laid down rules for our managers that, we don't want you to bring us a job candidate unless you've interviewed diverse candidates. And we had made real inroads, I think, particularly with entry-level jobs and when opportunities have come up in improving the diversity of our staff. Our gender balance in the newsroom is now 50-50. We have more women running coverage in the leadership roles by far than I think the Journal's had in its history. But you had people who come into the organization fairly recently look up to the bosses and their bosses' bosses and say, well, where are people who look like me? Where are people who I can talk to, who understand and reflect my experiences and my background? And there weren't nearly enough for most of them. And that itself was a source of contention and feedback that was helpful to us, even as we were feeling good about the progress that we made. And that was one way in which we realized that there was a lot more to do.
Dean, is this time different?
Yes, it is. News organizations at their best reflect the turmoil of the moment they're in, whether it's Vietnam, whether it's economic upheaval. And I think that this is a huge moment for the country. I think it's a moment for the country where people of color are demanding change. Not only inside our newsrooms, I'm talking about the world we cover, and I think we would be making a mistake if we didn't understand that those demands should be listened to. Not every demand, by the way, do you give in to, right? I mean, from any group, but that we should listen. I think the country has changed profoundly in the last handful of years. And I think we can't wall ourselves off from that change. If we look up a year from now and just go back to the way things were a year ago, I think we will have missed a powerful moment in American society. And I think we will be lesser for it as journalistic institutions. I think that the struggle for us is we have to hold on to our bedrock principles. And then we have to understand what things that surround those principles can and should change. And I think that that's going to be a very, very difficult leadership trick, but I think that we are all going to have to do it.
So speaking of leadership, I want to make sure we get to the election. I'm looking at the time. We are days away from the election.
Which election?
Which election? I was going to say, or we've been in the middle of it. If you're watching CNN and seeing the lines of voting, I do want to rewind a little bit though and reflect on how our coverage of this president has changed, as well as how we've changed in that process. And I wonder, Dean, if you could take us into the phrase "the president said falsely," or kind of where we are now on characterizing truths. Lies, and again, just the characterization of this. So take me there, and then take me to where that brings us for the next few days.
We actually use the word lie on the front page of the New York Times just before the election, because we thought, I mean, that's a word you want to use lightly. It not only implies that the person knew what they were saying was a lie, and I chose to use it after much debate inside the newsroom, because when Donald Trump announced just before the election, reluctantly he acknowledged that maybe Barack Obama was born inside the United States, and that there was such clarity that was a lie when he had said all along that he wondered whether he was. So we used the word lie. Between the falsehoods, between the sort of the behavior that's just very different from any other president any of us have ever covered. So I think we've had to evolve. I think, and all of us have evolved. I mean, everybody on this call has evolved. I think in really healthy ways. We're much more likely to say that the president said something that was false. The world of fact checking used to live sort of in a back room someplace with a couple of nerds who would occasionally fact check. Fact checking is front and center, as it should be. And I think that's an appropriate change. I think we've changed appropriately for this president.
Matt, do you have I'm looking at the time, but briefly, do you kind of have a response to that or a framework that you feel like over the last 4 years, the way we cover X has changed?
I would say one of the challenges all the time with Donald Trump is so much of the story is about Donald Trump, the person. And he's really actually, let's be honest, he's probably smarter in many ways about what punches our buttons and what we cover and how we'll respond, and more has a deeper immersion in how media works than probably any president in our lifetimes. And so it's been a constant challenge with him, especially when there's a moment of spectacle or when he says something of, do you cover that because it's news? Or do you not cover that and give it attention because you should put your attention over here? And you can make the argument on all sides in almost every case, and people go on social media and make that argument. So navigating that has been a challenge, and it's not going to go away. I think the other challenge with this president is, for all of us, has been one of, I think, the things he wants to do is make us a player in politics rather than our proper role on the sidelines, and draw us onto the field as a political player. And too often, I'm sorry to say, too often there have been corners and entities or people in the media who want to do that or who've fallen for that, which I think has been, unfortunately, I think a mistake for us at times. Last thing I'll say with him, and in general, something we should all keep in mind, we're in a world, not just a Donald Trump world, but a social media world where every day there's dramas on social media and there's moments, and there's viral clips, and more of that is going to come our way in the future. That's the way the world is going. It's important for quality news organizations to also not take their eye off the ball of policy. Still, how's the economy? What's working? What's not working? What's happening with the environment? There's been big policy implications and movements throughout the presidency. At times, I think, could have gotten stronger coverage across the board, where the drama of Donald Trump may have gotten in the way of some of the depth of those things. I think it's important that we never lose sight of the really important, hard work of really digging deep into whoever the president is, what is happening in the country and the policy and the government. Those are really important things too.
So speaking of policy, thank God for The Economist over the last 4 years for a respite from some of what Matt's talking about. I'm just wondering if you can give us the global view, zoom us out a little bit on what the world thinks of all of this, and if even the perception of the US and its standing in the world has changed.
Gosh, that's a very broad question. Clearly the world is pretty much as fascinated by Donald Trump and how he behaves in the Donald Trump presidency as anyone. There is a kind of, a president who tweets in the way that he does, who has a kind of relationship with the truth that he does, causes fascination, shocked fascination around the world. I think that the other element of this, though, and to answer your question directly, I think America's standing, you just need to look at polls all around the world, has changed fundamentally, and perceptions of America has changed. And, the notion of America as the kind of leader of the free world, moral leader, has definitely shifted. That said, I think there's a sense too, though, of people not really understanding or finding it hard to understand what's going on in America. And there is a sense, I think, of the the febrile nature, the polarization, and it's a truism, right, to say that American politics is polarized. I spent most of my adult life in America. I moved back in 2014 to London, and all my career there, people were talking about the polarization of American politics, but it is now very clearly so much more extreme than it was. And you have two sides really not being able to agree, not only on having different viewpoints, but different fact bases, or at least believing, different things to be facts. And I think that there is a role that the media writ large in the US has played in that. And I think that sort of sense of what is actually going on in America beyond Donald Trump, what is happening, what is the mood of the country, what is happening on the ground, I think it's harder for people outside the US to get a real sense of that. And I think the prism through which you view America depends really through which bit of the American media you view America. And that's, I think, something quite new.
From my family's WhatsApp messages, I can assure you that is absolutely true. So I thank you for bringing that perspective. So just very quickly, I'll give you one word or one sentence. The theme of tonight is reset. So where do you expect to see the most surprising and potentially biggest reset? Dean?
Bad reset, the continued collapse of local news. This has hastened what might have taken 2 years. It's gonna happen really quickly. Good reset, I think that we all got forced to accelerate our abilities to become powerful digital news organizations. I think we had to. I think that all the skills everybody has talked about, we've had to get really better at it faster than we expected. So overall, I think the journalism institutions that survive and do well will be much, much better. But I'm worried about everybody else.
Sanny?
Can I broaden out from journalism? Bad reset. I think a worsening of some of the really worrying social trends we had before. And for me, inequality is top of the list. COVID has made the existing inequalities much wider, much broader. That's a real problem for our societies. Hopeful good reset, a recognition of that, and a real effort to change our politics and policies that we can address it. And my little extra on that, a real recognition that we need to do something serious on climate change, because COVID is climate change in fast forward, in the sense that it was a global phenomenon, huge consequences. We have one staring us in the face. That's my hope.
Matt?
Good reset, the opportunity, not just in terms of how we tell stories, but how we reach people and how we connect people, and what news organizations can do. And I think it's going to change more in the next 10 years than it's changed in the last 25 years. I think technology advances and habits continue to change, and there's been a big habit change here that we have to sort out. There's huge opportunities for news organizations to get it right. The bad side is that those same technological trends continue to pose threats to the ideas that underlie objective journalism, fact-based journalism. The deepfakes problem is about to get much, much worse, so much, much more complicated. Having a role, which I think all three of our organizations would aspire to have, as a reliable, trustworthy, fact-based gatekeeper of news and information in that world will get more challenging for all of us, and will be one of the tests for journalism ahead.
So I share Dean's bad reset, which is why I made the decision that Anne alluded to earlier of leaving my role to launch a community news company. So I am guided by many of the lessons we've talked about today, and actually it came at a really opportune time for me. And thank you all for being so generous with your time and your lessons learned.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Hello and welcome to everyone. And now it is my great delight to have a chance to talk to Julie Sweet, who is the head of Accenture, and someone who has been described as one of the most powerful women in corporate America. So Julie, it's great to have you here. We are in extraordinary times. I'm talking to you with my iPhone because I've had tech problems. So excuse the picture. You're talking from your home. We're all having to adapt in incredible ways. How has it been for Accenture trying to adapt to this very, very bizarre new normal?
Well, thanks, Jillian. First, I do want to say I'm honored to be here today. And first and foremost, because I'm the beneficiary and a believer in a free and independent press. And so I'm very excited to get to be a part of this 45th anniversary of the Knight-Bagehot Fellowship. And as an alum of Columbia, I'm also particularly proud to get to participate tonight. I went to Columbia Law School. As I look at what Accenture has been doing, on the one hand, some things have been pretty easy for us because we're one of the most remotely run companies in the world pre-COVID. We've not had a headquarters for 30 years. In fact, the CFO and the CEO, this is the first time in 30 years we've been in the same office. So in some ways, what has been unusual for many companies was more usual for us in terms of the day-to-day. But of course, everything's changed in terms of how we're serving clients, and most importantly, in the challenges we're helping clients with today.
And when you look across at how your clients are behaving, and you have an unusually good window into corporate America because you have such a wide range of clients, do you think we are in recovery mode, crisis mode? Are you a believer in the K, the L, the V, the W? How do you see it right now?
You know, it's interesting because I think you have to first look at it from a mindset perspective, which is also really important. If you talk to the world's largest companies, and many of them being in the US and headquartered here, even in the most severely hit industries, what we are seeing is CEOs who are very much determined to turn the page, meaning accepting that there is a new reality and they have to find the way to reconnect with growth and move forward. And so the amount of work that we're doing today on transformation, on reimagining and how to work in this environment is really incredible. But then you have to also look at it from a different size perspective. So for small and medium-sized enterprises, it's a very different picture as you look at the economy today. And that's why, for example, it's so important that we take action on the fiscal stimulus, because we are in a very fragile position and it's very uneven in terms of that from a mindset and an experience perspective.
Right. And do you think that the political picture is creating particular pressure in an economic sense? And do you think things are going to change next year as a result of the current election?
You know, it's interesting because, I was just speaking to some of our clients who are in the banking world who were commenting to me about how much activity they're seeing. And even in typically just prior to a presidential election, there's sort of less activity as people wait. You know, I think today the challenges ahead of us are so pressing that companies are very focused on execution. And now, is there going to be a change based on, which candidate wins? They have very different policy perspectives. But if you think about the challenges businesses face, right, to navigate a financial, health, and social crisis, it is full steam ahead. And, as to what has to happen. And that's why I think you're seeing a different feel before the election. There isn't sort of a pause and a wait in our experience.
That's fascinating. If you were in our shoes as a journalist right now, trying to cover a business sector which is incredibly uneven, very hard for us to capture through glib stereotypes, and very hard for us to physically get out and see because we can't travel. Have you got any tips about what you think are the key to trying to make sense of this from the point of view of business journalists? And any stories you think that the business world's missing right now?
You know, it's a great question. I think it goes to your role as well. So let me just talk maybe a couple things that are very top of mind when I think about your role and today's challenges. And the first is really getting the right story around educating on the vaccines and the impact. And I think that this is a story that needs to be told over and over again. There's a lot of misinformation and misunderstanding. It's incredibly complex. I'm privileged to talk to many of the CEOs of the world's biggest pharmaceutical companies. And there's going to be a very important role in educating what the vaccines do and don't do, educating about the length of impact and the causes of why things are going to be delayed, and sort of understanding that there's a huge amount of uncertainty, and so the other behavioral things are going to be critical. And I say that because, as I talk to many CEOs, both in the US and around the world, one of the challenges is helping our people also understand, first of all, there isn't sort of a wait and something's going to happen, but also that the behavioral changes like wearing masks are, potentially very, very long term. And so it's not that you're not telling the story or missing the story, but I would just say that there is a lot of discussion going on about how important it is going to be to educate. And that can not only be from us, it really has to also be very much in the media and press. And so that would be very top of mind for me. And then the second piece is the accountability that I think is so important as you think about your role as well in the broader social crisis. So if you think in the US, we've talked a lot about fighting racism. And, one of the things I always encourage is tell the story 6 months from now, right? When we are making commitments as companies, hold us accountable, but also some journalists are so good about who they select to highlight, right? So in a world where we're saying we need to focus on getting leadership of, Black and Hispanic Americans, for example, your decision on who are you going to highlight, who are you going to get a quote on? And I think that's an area that oftentimes the press is telling the stories around diversity. But when you look at who do you go, promote as an expert, right? There's a disconnect. And I think there's a huge opportunity to be very intentional about that in the media.
Well, that is a very good point. And I'm curious to know what you think about that in relation to gender, because we at the FT created something called a Janet bot a couple of years ago, which was an AI program to track how many women we actually had on the pages, like Janet Yellen, which is why we called it a Janet bot, so that we could see when we were falling short because of unconscious bias. Do you think that business women like yourself get a fair, balanced play in the media? Or are there things that you think we could and should be doing differently to bring in more of a female perspective and have more demonstration effect?
Jillian, I actually think in gender, the media is doing really well. And I've been the beneficiary of that, particularly earlier in my career before I became global CEO. And that's why I wanted to highlight it, because it mattered that journalists took time to interview me, to focus on me as I was trying to build a presence as a business person. And I think that we need to do the same more broadly, particularly when you think about what we're trying to fight in this country around systemic racism. And it does require, so for example, I wasn't global CEO, and many people, and I remember spending time with you, Jillian. I was the CEO of North America. Look, it was a big business, right? But it did require people to sort of think differently about seeking out the views. And I think at this time, it's really important that journalists think about ethnicity as well as gender. And I think there's been huge progress, and it makes a difference. It really makes a difference.
Do you have any tips for young female journalists, or not so young like myself, who want to find ways to project themselves and to basically ensure that their voice as business journalists is heard? Because unfortunately, we still have a bit of an imbalance in the world of business, and particularly financial journalism.
What I think is so important, I just look at my own career, and, I have a quarterly learning agenda, and I talk about it internally and externally. I was a general counsel, and then I became, now I'm the CEO of a tech company. I did not know technology. I did not educate myself in technology when I was in college and so on. And so when I think about whether you're a journalist or any professional today, but particularly in the journalist field, is this need to really learn and constantly do so that you become the person that the company is like. We have journalists that we say they really understand our business, right? And they are right. And we actually watch all the time who are the right voices, who truly understand. And I think it's a huge opportunity when you're young, particularly right now, because everything's changing. I remember when I became a partner in a law firm, and it was right when you had a total change of the securities laws. And all of a sudden, the people who'd been 30 years in the field, there was a level playing field because everyone had to learn it. And I think right now, it's those who are willing to invest and really learn have a huge opportunity to be more successful and to become a voice and to have CEOs and other companies really seek you out.
Yeah, well, I think you're right, because of course, the fact we have all gone digital means anyone who's a digital native, which invariably is a millennial, suddenly has an advantage over crumbly old Generation X's like myself. And the learning curve is very uneven right now. Do you find yourself that you're being overtaken by some of the kids in your office in terms of digital?
Well, first of all, my children remind me every day that they're much better at digital than I am. Fortunately, 70% of our business is digital, cloud, and security. And so the reason I have a quarterly learning agenda is because I have to keep up. And I guess that's the point, right? Is it doesn't actually matter around age. It's about the commitment to learning. It's not enough to be a digital native, right? It's about being committed to really educating yourself about what do these things mean. There's too much around technology that are buzzwords today, right? We have to reimagine everything. We have to do this. Like, what does that really mean? And especially right now, I mean, we think that the transformation of enterprise through technology, it was a 10-year journey. It's going to be a 5-year journey. And, what are the implications of that on jobs? One of the things that's top of mind for me was pre-COVID, we were doing a terrible job in this country in really educating our kids broadly. We have the best universities, of course, but more broadly, for years we've talked about, we're terrible in math. We're, compared to the rest of the world. The need for that to accelerate, but exactly why? How do those skills translate? Why is that different in a technology world? How is it that the person who's working for the telco actually has to understand these technologies? Those are the stories that need to be told, but at a deeper level, because one of the most important things that I think you all do is you advance ideas and you advance the issues. And right now, they're much more complicated, and it's going to happen a lot faster. And I think you have a very important role to play to highlight those.
And do you have any thoughts about how we can combat fake media, misinformation, all of the perversions that are cropping up right now because of the dash into digital media? Do you have any thoughts about that? And I'll be curious to hear from you where you think the media will be in 5 years' time.
It's a great question, and probably a longer one than we can have. I mean, every industry, including my own, by the way, is being disrupted with that. And I think there's a couple things. I'm not sure whether this will totally answer where it'll be in 5 years' time, but one of the things we focus a lot on is how do people consume information? How do they learn? So, for example, in training, what we find is there's a training course, but unless you train and do, you don't retain the information. We do a lot of our learning. We trained 300,000 people over the last 2 years in new IT. And what we've learned is that people consume information much differently than traditional training. And I see that in the media as well. And I think thinking about your role and how you have to evolve based on how people learn is an important part also in addressing the fake media, right? And so really connecting, how do people consume and how do they learn, with how you're conveying the information. I think there's something there that I know we spend a lot of time now because we're helping so many clients upskill their people. But I do believe that there's learnings there that are relevant for journalism as well.
Right. Well, we're almost out of time. And so just really the last thing I wanted to ask you is, when we go back to normal, and we're not normal right now, as I'm talking to you with very bad technology, which just keeps breaking down at my end, because I am a Generation X. But when we go back to normal, how much of your job do you think will go back to how it was before? And what's the first thing that you look forward to doing when the lockdowns and restrictions are eased?
Great question. So first of all, I will tell you that I really like to think about this right now as a new reality, because I think it's important that we not wait to go back to normal, right? And so I think, we ourselves, literally, we started our fiscal year and we said, we're going to turn the page. We're no longer thinking of ourselves in crisis mode, but this is a new reality. And in the new reality, change is a constant. We just announced our new brand called Let There Be Change. And that should be an inspiration to all of us to embrace change. And so the way we're thinking about it as a company, but also personally, is finding the things that are great today. So for example, meals, and when we can, we still can go out we haven't locked down again. My children and I look at having, dinner out very differently. It's more of an occasion than it was pre-COVID, right? And the kinds of conversations that we're having with our kids over these meal times are different. And I'm celebrating that. And so I think it's important from a business perspective, but also as a social perspective, is to not keep waiting, to embrace change and then really focus on each stage of change and how can we make it better for society, for business, as we rebuild. And so that would be my message, is don't wait, embrace change, and help us be a part of making it, for the benefit of all.
Hello and welcome back again. And I have 3 more things to quickly say. Firstly, I want to say on behalf of all of the Knight-Bagehot fellows, alums, and everyone else who's watching, a very big thank you to Anne Grimes. We asked her just over a year ago to step in and be parachuted into the program at very short notice. And she said back then it was going to be a tough order to jump into the program. I don't think she had a clue how tough it was going to be in these extraordinary times. So thank you, Anne, for everything you've done. You've been amazing, and well done for pulling together this evening and surviving. Secondly, I just want to remind you all that there's going to be a Zoom after party where you can talk to either the fellows or the alums and connect and do a bit of socializing. It is the only after party you will ever be able to go to in pajamas. So go ahead and do that and have some fun. And most importantly of all, bid on the pictures, because it's in a good cause and the auction will be going on the Zoom after party. Lastly, I'm going to give you the hard sell again. If you've enjoyed what you've been watching, if you've been inspired by what we've been talking about, if you care about the future of journalism, please do donate.